Hi, Sam, Gone Photography here. So, in today's video, we're going to be talking about aperture. Up until now, we've talked about ISO, shutter speed, autofocus points. All of these things are in your camera body. Now we're going to be talking about aperture, and that's in your lens. So the aperture is a diaphragm in your lens. The bigger it is, the smaller the f-stop, the more light it lets in. The smaller it is, the bigger the f-stop, the less light it lets in. So a lens maximum aperture is denoted by the, I think we talked about this, we definitely talked about this in the lens section. If you didn't hear it, go back and watch that video. But the bigger the aperture size, the more expensive the lens, and the better the lens. Just, it lets in more light. So now there's two things we need to know about aperture, and that's one, how it affects exposure, and two, how it affects image quality. How it affects exposure is the smaller the f-stop, the more light. The larger the f-stop, the less light. So let's show some examples here. This first one picture we took at f1.4, very bright, and the second one we took at f7. Everything else is the same. We kept the ISO and the shutter speed exactly the same. So just remember that that's how it affects exposure. This other part is far more important when it comes to aperture, in my opinion, and that's how it affects image quality. Now, the lower the f-stop, the smaller the depth of field, the shorter the depth of field. So think of it like this. It's f1.4, f7. It's way over there. It's just way over there. So let's just jump into an example. All right, this first picture, we're gonna put some of these things in the background. You see they're blurry because we're shooting at f1.4. This next one we're gonna shoot at f4, or unless I don't shoot it at f4 and it's at a higher level, just check the picture. And it shows, see, and I had to change the shutter speed and the ISO so I can get the exact same exposure. So it's, it's not about how it affects exposure, it's about the depth of field. So you'll notice the things in the background are in focus. They're not in focus at the 1.4. And you might be thinking, oh, that's great, blah, 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 I don't really care, I'm just gonna make sure everything's in focus, and my camera only goes down to 3.5, so it's not a big deal. Which, if it only goes down to 3.5, it isn't a big deal. You should be able to get in focus a lot of stuff. But for some of you that are deciding to go into photography and get a nicer lens, maybe a prime lens, prime is a great example. Most prime lenses will go down to like 1.8. You get like there's a Canon $100, 1.8, and it's a great lens. And you just need to remember how it affects, like, just a straight up picture of let's just take an example for a person. But one thing I've always ran into is at 1.4, if I'm close enough, I can get the nose in focus, in the eyes, just that tiny little area out of focus. And that's a depth of field problem. That's a aperture problem. So I needed to crank it up to like I think I only got 1.8 was fine. Or you can just try to focus on the eye specifically. And then it'll make a very blurry picture of like everything else. It's the style now. It's in style. Another thing you need to watch out for when you're taking group pictures is depth of people standing. Like, a lot of times you'll have a front row and a back row, and you'll be like, oh, I'll just bust it into 1.8 or 1.4. You got to watch out for that, because sometimes you can get the people in the front row in focus and the people in the back row out of focus. So that's a big thing to look out for. One thing I always recommend, if you're really planning on doing photography, one of these. It's an eye cup. You stick it on the back of your LCD screen like that, and then you put your eye up against it, and you can see inside you can see the lens, or see the LCD screen on the back much better without the blinding light around you. It's super nice for that. And you can see a lot better. You can tell what's in focus, what's out of focus. You can check for motion blur. You can check for graininess. Just one of these bad boys. Don't get any. This one was pretty fancy, but I wouldn't recommend something that fancy. Just get something that fits your LCD screen. This one is a 3-inch. Yeah, it's a 3-inch one, and I had to put a little thing on my LCD screen, little metal piece. I have magnets here, so it'll hook to it. and so it won't fall off. Very helpful though. I would highly recommend one of these if you're planning on doing a lot of photography outside or in bright situations, or if group pictures, group anything. I have a little on my sling that I keep my camera on. I have a pouch here and I just leave it there all the time. And I just hit the microphone and it probably exploded, my bad. So that's what I would recommend. If you want to practice aperture, the setting to go to is AV. It lets you set the aperture, lets you set the ISO, and lets you set the exposure. And then it'll automatically do a shutter speed. And just like in the TV mode, if the shutter speed blinks this time, it means it can't reach the desired exposure with the shutter speed. But shutter speed is so dynamic, it will literally, it could keep the shutter open for like a minute and close. It's ridiculous. So, you know, just watch out for that. So I would practice with aperture in that way, do a lot of test shots, do a lot of checking, a little finding out. Good rule of thumb is I try to keep it under 2 when dealing with just one person. I try to keep it usually above like 3.5 for multiple people. And then right in the middle, I would say like 2 people up close. Just make sure you remember like how far wide back, how far back they are, how far forward they are. And then for those of you that are tuning in from Flippin' Mike's channel, for eBay items, make sure you keep your aperture up, because you want really good detail. You don't want, you know, if you're taking a picture of like, say, a piece of clothing like Mike does, to have the sleeve in focus and the back sleeve out of focus if you're turning the mannequin or something like that. That's just nuts. So keep the aperture around 4 or higher. But a lot of you guys, if you're just going in for budget cameras for taking eBay items or family items, most of the time you're gonna be running 3.5. At 3.5 is the lowest you can get. And that should be fine for anything. You're gonna get good depth of field. I would recommend to most people buying a prime lens. You get a lot of that fun. Like, I mean, there's some cheap 50mm prime lenses, 1.8 for Canon, that are just great. I mean, you can, you know, I use a 50mm, the nicer version of that. Absolutely love it. So I would recommend getting a prime lens if you really want to get into aperture. It's really in right now. I kind of sometimes joke about how it's like the hipster setting, the AV, because it's just, you know, that's all the Instagram stuff. I mean, I like it, I use it, but I would much rather have everything in perfect detail on all of my pictures in the perfect exposure, but, you know, that's just me. Perfection. No, I'm just kidding. That's stupid. Anyways, if you'd like to see any more of my videos, I have some on ISO, shutter speed, autofocus points, which in this situation of aperture is probably a good one to go watch, just because you need to be able to figure out like, well, I don't want this person in focus, I want this person in focus. You can change the autofocus points so that it is someone else, or on a tree, or some people in the background, so the front people are in blurry and out of focus. But really, the key to photography is taking pictures. Lots and lots and lots of pictures. Check out your aperture. Remember to watch the lens video, and you can figure out exactly what the aperture is on your lens. It's just a good thing to know. Next video, I think we're going to probably talk about just like some camera maintenance stuff. Just like, you know, your memory card, how to get your pictures off your memory card and onto either your phone or social media. We're not going to go into editing stuff for a while. Probably going to get into I'm probably going to take you guys along on a sports photography adventure and like a family photography adventure and some senior pictures and stuff like that. So tune in, subscribe, and have a great day.